All right, Missouri gets a gift with Kansas State staying ranked. There's still two positions between Ole Miss and Missouri. Penn State's just kind of sitting there in the middle. We go down to the last ranking. I'm telling you, it probably does not look good. It's one of those things that you need Florida State to win the game but not get in the playoff, and that's not possible at the moment either. So it's not a good situation if you are looking at the NY6. If you're looking at the Citrus Bowl, you're fine. You're going to be good to go there. But it probably doesn't look good with them deciding to keep Kansas State ranked. That is what caused them not to fall to that one position between Ole Miss and Missouri, which would allow one to be taken over the other. And I don't know how they would do Penn State. But Kansas State staying ranked is a massive boon for Missouri, and they should honestly thank their lucky stars that happened, because they were probably getting ready to get past. Anyway, this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, and I'm likely the only person you're going to hear from today that has had an office in the Manning Center at Ole Miss and has also worked in the national media with Yahoo Sports. I'm going to be joined in a few minutes by Mike Huseman and Dalen Flowers, and we're going to talk about what just happened. Ole Miss moves up to 11, so they did move up this week, but that space between them and Missouri is probably not beneficial. I assumed that they'd end up being side by side because Kansas State would not be ranked. Kansas State got ranked, and that makes things a little bit more difficult. And if you look at the rankings, the way they're doing it, they've kind of been stuck in what they want to do. They have them ranked a certain way, and it literally is just one man out, one man in type situation. They're not moving up or down at all. So that is one way to look at what is going on as well. Let's bring in Dalen Flowers and Mike Huseman and find out what's going on. Hey, Mike, Dalen, how are y'all doing?
Doing well, yeah.
All is well, my friend. Can't complain at all.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, what are your impressions on the college football playoff rankings?
As a native Minnesotan, I experience Big Ten West football almost every weekend. It looks like you're going to get to experience the Hawkeyes in the come bowl season in the Citrus Bowl. And it's just the way it is. I as a neutral in the Ole Miss versus Mizzou, debate, I thought you guys have the better resume. And I'm not just saying that to, blow smoke at you. To me, it seemed like if you break it down on most levels, I would put Ole Miss ahead of them. I think that's the way it is. Now, qualitatively, if it were a head-to-head matchup, I actually think Mizzou would probably beat them. But that shouldn't matter because we shouldn't be dealing with hypotheticals at this point, is how I look at it.
Yeah, and there is still one more poll to come out, and we all know what happened to TCU in 2014 and how the committee can get squirrely from time to time. Dalen, I don't understand how Kansas State can be ranked. That was a huge part of my calculus going into this, was Kansas State falling out of the poll. Mm-hmm. Once Mizzou kept the two ranked teams beat, then it's kind of an apples to apples comparison. Mizzou could get into that fight, but I have no idea how Kansas State can be still ranked after losing to a 6-6 team at home.
Yeah, I think that was the big surprise. But for me, that's why I'm kind of questionable about us being behind Penn State. I know they had a really good win against Iowa earlier in the year, but other than that, that's their only ranked win. And I continue to think when we talk about what is the ideology of who is in front of who and stuff like that, when do we bring in strength of schedule and strength of record? I continue to hear, and when we say that, we have 2 ranked wins. And I think those are standpoints to why we should be in front of other teams. Now, I think, keeping Kansas State in gives Mizzou that little bit of an edge over us, but I'm more questionable about teams like Penn State. Like, they have 1 ranked win, and their resume is almost just identical to us. And so what is the placement for teams such as that are so close to one another? And I really don't know what it is, but we'll see down the road how they continue. But I also think that's so big important for us to have the 12 playoff team coming up. I just think that it's going to be vital for other teams to get a look. And also as well, I think that the top four needs a more room to improve. Just the semifinal games haven't really been the best in the past couple of years. So I think it's going to be really improvement for us for the 12 team playoffs.
Yeah. Mike, whenever you look at this, we were, Ole Miss and Mizzou fans have been going at each other for about 3 days now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I've enjoyed it. As an outsider, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. I enjoy kicking anthills, and they enjoy coming back. They're an aggressive fan base, and anytime you're dealing with an aggressive fan base, that's the kind of reply you can get, and it's fine. But should Ole Miss fans actually be turning their attention towards Penn State? Should that have actually been where we have kind of dedicated our gaze?
Maybe, but that's not how fandom works. We're typically not rivals with people in other conferences. And I think in terms of a actual ranking, probably, but it would be less fun that way. And we all know why. Yeah.
If you have a situation, Dalen, and this is the thing that could change everything. Okay, this is Ole Miss's minuscule of hope to go to the NY6, and that is Tulane has a chance to be a conference champion on Saturday. If they win the conference championship, they'll go to a New Year's Six bowl as well, and that'll cause Ole Miss's resume to go up even another notch. And I think that is what would cause them to jump Penn State, or Mizzou fell down to the next spot. I thought Mizzou was going to fall to 10 because Kansas State was going to fall out. That's what I thought was going into this week to happen. The committee did some shady stuff to keep Kansas State in there. I just don't know about that, thinking about what's going on. But the committee this year it's funny how stagnant teams have been, Mike. You got Georgia at number 1. That's fine. They're the best team in the country. Nobody's beating Georgia. Michigan's good. Washington and Oregon's about to duke it out, and the winner of that game is going to make the playoff. And then you have Florida State, which they're undefeated. I get the fact that they're undefeated, and it is not their fault that they lost their quarterback. They have no chance to beat Georgia without Jordan Travis.
Agree. Yeah. One thing to touch on just briefly that you went over, I think your resume will look good. You talked about the Tulane game. So I think they almost certainly win. SMU will be starting a backup QB. Preston Stone is done for the year. We know that. So Green Wave probably get a W. That game is in New Orleans as well. So looking good for you guys. And fast forwarding to that topic, agree. There's 2 things I have said about Florida State all week. If they win the game against Louisville, they have to be in the playoffs. I also hope they lose, because I don't think they have a chance to compete in the playoffs without Jordan Travis. We get a better playoffs if they're not in it at this time.
Yeah, and honestly, right now, unless Ole Miss moves up or they do some kind of switcheroo with Penn State or something like that in this poll, they do the TCU 2014 type thing with the polls. Ole Miss's best shot at the NY6 is that Florida State wins the game and somehow drops out of the playoffs. That is probably Ole Miss's best chance. The team that I feel most sorry for is Texas. Texas, to me, is one of the best 4 teams in the country, and for 100%. Some reason they can't get above that 7 line. And that one, Texas should be in over Florida State. The winner of the Washington-Oregon game should go, and Ohio State should be watching on TV just like everybody else.
Yeah,
right.
I agree with that.
I agree. I think Oregon's the hottest team in the country right now, but I also I really don't like UT, but I cannot be nothing but respectful to what Sarkisian has done in such a short amount of time. I think he's developed what he wanted very quickly, and I think the players have bought in, and so that's very important to have what you want very quickly, but also your players to buy in. I think Texas has already submitted their schedule in terms of who they play and how much they could dominate. I know that OU loss was tough for them, but it was a close game. And I think going back to this, again, I think the 12 team is important because again, it's this stagnant point. I think it's funny that we're getting to this point and now we're going to the 12-team playoffs. But look at how close every single one of these teams are in the magnitude of, even this past weekend, Bama was so close to losing. Florida State almost lost. Washington almost lost. That's how close these things are becoming, because it's becoming a more competitive, diverse game at this point of the time.
You know, one thing that's interesting to me is it looks like let's just say for giggles that Georgia goes to the playoff, Alabama and Missouri is in the NY6, Ole Miss is in the Citrus. That means the ReliaQuest is going to get the number 13 team in the country in their bowl game. And that's probably going to be them against Notre Dame. That ReliaQuest bowl is number 13 versus number 17. This is a year that the, not necessarily mid-tier, the upper middle class bowl games of the ReliaQuest, there's a trickle down into them, but man, that's actually a good little ball game. And I don't think Jaden Daniels is going to end up playing in that game, but I mean, the LSU versus Notre Dame could be all kinds of fun.
It's the Brian Kelly reunion tour. That game's great for marketing.
Yeah, the Citrus Bowl looks like it's going to be Ole Miss and Iowa. That's 11 versus 16. Let's see, other games you would have the Orange Bowl would be Louisville versus Ohio State or Washington. I think the number one team that didn't make the playoff goes to that Orange Bowl. So they could, like, if Oregon wins that game, they could drop Washington down to 5. So it could be like Washington versus Louisville in that game.
I bet Ohio State jumps them if Washington loses.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how that works, right?
Yeah.
And Oklahoma State is number 18 in the playoff rankings. They got boat raced by USA 33-6 this season. And Central Florida, after they won Bedlam, beat them like 45-0. And Oklahoma State is still number 18. That one's interesting to me.
They've been an interesting, because their fan base is like super salty, like, oh, we're really good. We beat all these teams, we won all these games. Ollie Gordon's great. But they got super lucky with the schedule. And their wins, I mean, they got on the trot Kansas, who was okay, West Virginia, Cincinnati, Houston, BYU. They beat a lot of teams that weren't really good. And they've also lost to some teams that aren't very good either.
Yeah, and one thing that you've seen in this thing, winning doesn't matter. It is honestly. Let's take Missouri for instance. Missouri beat nobody. Missouri's best win is Tennessee, an 8-win team. Maybe Memphis, who did win 9, but they showed well in games that they lost. They only lost to LSU by 10. They lost to Georgia by 9. Ole Miss got boat raced against Georgia, and apparently that was the deciding factor. And once you got blocked off from that line, there was nothing you can do. Even though Ole Miss's only losses have been on the road at Georgia and on the road at Alabama, Ole Miss led in the second half against Alabama and was a 1-score game in the fourth quarter. Ole Miss shouldn't be punished for that, but I mean, there's this narrative that's going out that Ole Miss struggled against top teams. And well, Ole Miss was a 1-score down with like 10 minutes to go in that ball game. And it's just an interesting situation with the way that they just log jammed at the top point of this college football playoff rankings. Like in 2007, and we all thought that this year had a chance to be 2007 on steroids with all the weird stuff happening. Nothing weird happening. It was chalk almost throughout the season. And once you messed up, there was no getting back in. Dalen.
Yeah. I think when we talk about these things, because I want to ask you guys, if Bama beats Georgia this weekend, do you think they get over ahead of Texas? Because does that head-to-head matter at this point? Because I would say the same thing for us beating LSU, Mizzou losing to LSU. Does that matchup matter anymore?
It matters until it doesn't.
Okay.
I mean, that it matters if they want it to matter. And they want it to matter in the Alabama-Texas game because, honestly, I think they're secretly hoping that Alabama beats Georgia and there's no SEC teams in the playoff.
Yeah.
I think they're secretly hoping for that. And for that reason alone, that head-to-head matters. They're not going to jump over Texas because they don't want to even have a potential to have two Southeastern Conference teams in the playoff. So now they have it set up to where if Alabama gets hot and beats them, Alabama's not going up to number 4. They're going to stay below Texas. Maybe that's the path for Texas. You have Oregon beat Washington. You have Texas win their championship against Oklahoma State, and Florida State wins an ugly game that's 7-6 or something like that with 17 turnovers, and maybe Rodemaker gets hurt or something like that where they find an excuse to move it down. Maybe that's the path for Texas. But, yeah, I genuinely think they're looking for a reason to keep the SEC out.
I think if the top 3 teams win and Florida State loses, Texas is in if they win. That's probably Texas's easy path, is if Florida State loses.
You don't think they would put Ohio State in there?
Not a chance. Not over a conference champion.
Okay. All
because,
right, Matt.
like you said they don't want 2 SEC teams. I don't think they want 2 Big Ten teams either. I think they want 4 different conferences represented this year.
Yeah, this year is as close as they've come to just there being a cluster at the top.
Yep.
And I think they're going to go out with that. So Matthew Mitchell says Kansas State being ranked as criminal, and it's obvious what the committee is trying to do and cover up their mistake. I do think there's a little bit of truth there. And we'll see what happens. Kansas State absolutely should not be in the poll. Honestly, no 8-4 team should be ranked if there's any way to avoid that. Tennessee shouldn't be in like 20th at 8-4 either, in my opinion. Daniel Parker says, what up, Willis? Why is all the Mizzou fans thinking they're so much better than us? We have a better ranked wins. Yes. If you look at the top simple resume, Ole Miss wins that easily. Best wins, best losses, best schedule, strength of record, the whole 9 yards, Ole Miss wins. But if you drill down into it, and that's what they're doing, they beat Arkansas by more than Ole Miss beat Arkansas. They didn't beat Vanderbilt by more than Ole Miss, but they beat some of the bad teams worse than Ole Miss won. They did better against their bad SEC teams for whatever reason. Now they have like less than like 1-score games against Middle Tennessee and those things, but we don't need to talk about that.
I haven't looked at the advanced metrics like the second order wins yet this week. Do either of you guys know if that changed much with Mizzou, Ole Miss, like how their second order wins or the SP plus stuff looks right now?
No, I didn't. I do not know.
Okay.
Seems funny that Kansas State was ranked 25th and they talk about how it saves Mizzou while Ole Miss has 2 ranked wins. Yeah, that Kansas State game is the game. If Missouri makes the New Year's Six, it is because Kansas State basically saved them. And in this situation, in my opinion, feels like they purposely ranked Kansas State so they can keep the Mizzou narrative alive, makes it easier for the committee to keep them there. Just my opinion. Yeah. You guys can see exactly what the narrative is from the Ole Miss fans. But LSU and Tulane are both ranked higher than Kansas State. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily matter. All they need is ranked wins, and then they can say, hey, all of a sudden we can keep that eyeball test in that Georgia game, and there's a tiebreaker.
Yeah.
What Kansas State staying in does means Missouri gets to stay at 9, which gives them a space ahead of Ole Miss, because if they go into that last weekend where they're 10 and Ole Miss is 11, Ole Miss travels too well for bowl games. They're going to horse trade. They're going to do what they have to do, and Ole Miss is going to end up in Dallas. That's how that works. They have to kind of protect themselves because the Cotton Bowl wants Ole Miss.
Where did Ole Miss play Baylor a couple years ago? Was that New Orleans or Texas?
Sugar Bowl. That was Sugar Bowl. James Hall from Brookhaven, Mississippi. They could have left an 8-4 Tennessee out of the top 25. That would make Mizzou look even worse. Yeah. Missouri could have no teams ranked. They could have no teams ranked, and that changes the calculus on a lot of this stuff. The fact that Missouri had these teams ranked means that they can go to these secondary metrics, that they actually can look favorably at us, that you can't take them at face value of what's going on. And it makes it more of a hard sell for Ole Miss at the moment. It just does. How can Tennessee still be ranked? I have no idea. Tennessee is – honestly, I think Tennessee is probably worse than Kentucky. I know Kentucky got beat by Tennessee, but I just don't know. I low-key hope that Missouri plays Texas. I have a few jokes when Texas boat races them. Yeah. Missouri doesn't have a win against an SEC team with a winning conference record. They do not have a win against a team with that's ranked has more than 8 wins. They beat Memphis at 9. They have 9 wins. But whenever they play good teams do things. Look at what LSU did against them. Look what Georgia did against them. I honestly think it's going to be a similar type situation in the bowl game. Mizzou beat Arkansas when they were 4-7 and not 2-4 and still fighting for a bowl. Also, KJ Jefferson played against us, got hurt, 2 throws into the game. Yeah. Also against Florida, they played against the backup quarterback and needed a 4th and 17 to win that game. What did I miss? I'm just in here. Not a lot, Caleb. We're still going. Daniel Parker, this whole 14 playoff was always stupid to me anyway. It should have started the 12 this year. It would have started this year, but the Big Ten could not destroy another conference because remember the Big Ten got the alliance together with the Pac-12 and the ACC, and they shut the playoff expansion for 2024 or 2023 down. It should have been this year. They slowed everything down. Remember, everybody, they want to pause it to make sure that everybody was going to be able to have their way and do what they need to do. And then they use that opportunity, the Big Ten, to go to the Pac-12 and basically destroy them from within.
It probably is making the Big Ten more stable in the long term. So there were benefits to doing it. It just doesn't help us this year.
Yeah, but it didn't help the Pac-12.
It did not at all. It killed it.
Yeah. And Gary Rasco says, if we're going by who played Georgia close, why isn't Georgia Tech going to the New Year's Six? Hey, you got a point there. Vanderbilt also played them pretty well, honestly. Georgia also, with Brock Bowers and Mims playing, different team.
Auburn played them great.
Yeah, get Auburn in there. Penn State versus Mizzou Peach Bowl. Who do you think wins? And would Ole Miss be a better game? I would love to see Ole Miss play Mizzou in a new NY6 bowl game. That would be a fantastic game. Mizzou against Penn State. I don't think Penn State's good. That's the problem. I think they got I don't know what's the word.
Good defensively.
Yeah, they are very good defensively. The quarterback is Iowa-esque, even though Drew Lar he's supposed to be a decent quarterback, but when they played decent teams, he didn't show up.
Yeah, correct. It's tough to tell for that game because you don't know who the opt-outs would be. Penn State has maybe the best O-tackle in the country. Fashanu's not going to play in a bowl game because he'll be a top 5 pick.
Yeah. Donnie Weiberg says, seems like the college football narrative, they want the SEC East to be stronger than the SEC West. Well, that's not going to happen because, like all of the winning records in the SEC are in the West. It's the weirdest thing. So, Dalen, all right. So we're talking about it. Looks like that Ole Miss is going to end up in the Citrus Bowl. Like I said, if anybody watches the show personally, selfishly, it's 50 miles down the road for me, from my front door to the Citrus Bowl. I'm happy if that is where it is. But for Ole Miss fans, I did want the prestige that goes with an NY6. What do you think that the most important thing for Ole Miss to do besides win the game? Because if you play Iowa, win the game.
I think because again we don't know if JD hasn't officially announced he's coming back or not yet, but we would assume he is. I would think the biggest key for us is to see how he plays against another top defense from a different conference. I think that gives us an aspect of how we can compete going into the metrics of a 12-team playoff, so we can compete against a really good defense from a different conference that maybe gives us a little bit more of an advantage and momentum and even confidence going into that sessionary next year. I think this will be a really big game for our confidence because a bowl game, no matter what kind of bowl game you're getting, is always big, especially going into the next year. If you want to ride on momentum, I think that's something that we have to continue to do. It's going to be big for us to not just win, but have a really good 4 quarters. I think that's really been a weird point for us this year. We've sometimes started strong and didn't end well at times, like against Georgia, Bama. But with some games, you didn't start too well. We ended really strong. I think we have to be consistent against a team like Iowa if we want to really have some type of momentum going into the next season.
Mike, I've been bouncing numbers back in my head and everything. And I think if Ole Miss wins their bowl game, and it doesn't matter which bowl game it is, with Jaxson Dart potentially coming back, because I think Jackson's coming back, Quinshon, it's even 50-50 that Trey Harris comes back at this point. I think if Ole Miss wins the bowl game, if they beat Iowa in the Citrus Bowl, Ole Miss comes into the 2024 season, the 12-team playoff, all of that preseason, they're ranked like 7th in the country. What says you?
Yeah. I absolutely think they're a top 10 team. When you get that, 5 to 10, I can't think of anybody in the old Pac-12 that will be ahead of them going into next season. Oregon will be an interesting. Oregon's going to return a lot of guys, and we assume they'll portal successfully.
They need to find a quarterback because I think they're done with Bo Nix.
They are, yes. I would assume they will. But you got to figure, Ole Miss is going to be up there with Texas, Ohio State, Michigan. Penn State will be up there. Bama, Georgia,
Oklahoma.
Of course. Yep. I will be curious. Oklahoma, I think, could have some movement on that roster through the portal this year. That'll be interesting what happens there. Another team I think will be solid is LSU. I think they're going to be back again. Kelly's doing a good job. He's a solid coach. So see how they do in the portal.
And we got this question here from Daniel Parker. Since we have you, any incoming, outcoming portal news, rumors right now?
Well, the guy's name you had on the screen, Jerquan Scott, one of the best O-linemen we will see in the portal. We know that Auburn and South Carolina are both have offered him in the day plus that he's been in the portal. So that moved really quick. And then there's still not a lot of movement. It's mostly quarterbacks we've seen. An interesting guy will be Macklin, the good receiver from North Texas. He had 1,000 yards this year, went in the portal today. It'll be interesting where he goes. He'll be a weapon for someone.
His last name is Macklin, and he's from St. Louis.
Related to Jeremy, yes.
Yeah. So yes. Mizzou has to be a player potentially for him.
You would think so, yes.
Yeah.
And they utilize NIL very well too. So that's another, lending credence to him. Yeah, going there.
Yeah. And it looks like Davion Smith, the lineman from Memphis, I think that's his name.
Yep.
And also McCallum Pounders, who's a Mississippian, has popped up. I do think that Ole Miss is going to be active. Tomorrow's show, actually, if you watch, is all about the transfer portal on there. I think that Ole Miss has the ability, because they're not looking for a high dollar amount player. They're not looking for a left tackle. They're not looking for a quarterback, not looking for a running back, wide receiver, potentially a rush end. But because of that, I think you're going to see Ole Miss overspend a little bit in the interior of the offensive line. They're probably going to win a couple of those battles. So keep an eye on people like Jerquan Scott and McCallum Pounders and Davion Smith and those guys coming in. Because I also think that Ole Miss is going to punch up a little bit when it comes to the transfer portal, because they've discovered what they do. They're not going to find second-team players with Alabama and Georgia. They're going to find those small school guys that are better than the level they play at, and they're going to give them an opportunity like they did with Quincy McGee and players like that. To see John Saunders was a good example of that.
A guy to look for in that thread is Easton Kilty. He's an O tackle from University of North Dakota. Went in the portal a couple days ago after they got beat out of the playoffs. And Auburn, Boston College, Texas Tech, he already has P5 offers. He could be a guy that fills a need that they have there.
Okay. Yeah, and I think both lines of scrimmage, because if you look at the Georgia game, and everybody can talk about, Ole Miss was more than competitive in every game this season Georgia boat raced them. Why did Georgia boat race them? Because they have elite defensive linemen and elite offensive linemen, and that's who Ole Miss is chasing. So on the offensive and defensive line, Ole Miss has to get a little bit better. So look at the transfer portal whenever they build, especially with Georgia coming to Oxford in 9 months or so. Yeah, you can bet that they're going to do that. Let's see. David Gibson says Georgia, Michigan, Alabama, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Florida State, Penn State, or Oklahoma, Ole Miss. Florida State is going to be without Jordan Travis. I'm sure they're going to be fine in the portal, but they're not going to be what they are this year.
I don't think Oregon will be what they are either.
I don't either.
Penn State might be a little better, but they also might be at their ceiling. They might be as good as James Franklin can take them, honestly. I think that's a conversation.
Can I say a popular thing? If you're on that thread, is Ole Miss at that ceiling too? Is 10-2 the ceiling? Yeah, I mean
it might be.
I don't know.
But getting put into that sentence with those teams,
fantastic.
I mean, that's 12-team playoff land, and I think that Ole Miss and the fans should. The moment the Egg Bowl ended, everything became about the 12-team playoff. And Ole Miss needs to roster build and do what they need to do to try and potentially host a 12-team playoff round in that first round. Your goal should be to be ranked 5th through 8th, and to where you can have a game in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium where it's Ole Miss versus Oregon, or Ole Miss versus Penn State, or Ole Miss versus, I don't know,
Florida State. Yeah.
Florida State, something like that. That will be the biggest game in school history, and I think that is the goal for Ole Miss football.
Another team that could be on that list is a team we've talked about a lot today, Mizzou. They're going to return a lot of guys. They're going to lose Schrader, but Cook, Burden is going to be back. We expect them to do well in the portal. They'll be another team that I don't think expect to fall off.
They're going to end up being the second team in the East for the foreseeable future, I think. Nico Imaliava, he's going to be good eventually, but you're going to ask him to come in and kind of take over in year one. I just don't. I think that's a hard ask. Yeah. We've seen what Kentucky is. Kentucky kind of is what they are. So, yeah, you can't really count on that. I think Missouri can just kind of go through them again. South Carolina without Spencer Rattler, that becomes an interesting situation as well. Vanderbilt, heck, every quarterback they have went into the transfer portal yesterday.
Yep.
It's a situation where I genuinely think it's Georgia. It's going to be Missouri, although there is no SEC East next year.
That's true.
But of those teams, Missouri has a chance to stand out a little bit. But, you have Oklahoma, you have Texas, and they're kind of fighting with everybody else as well. And I wonder what their schedule looks like next year.
Oh, I actually can I have that page here.
Okay.
Steven, how do you think in fairs like this, I know Vanderbilt lost their quarterbacks, how do you think teams like that match up in today's football? I mean, NIL and transfer portal, how do you think they continue going along with their football programs?
I think Vandy needs to – I think they need to hit the group of 5 level hard. It's probably hard to get teams into Vandy.
Yeah.
Or get people into Vandy. But they need to hit the group of 5 level. They need to promote the fact that, hey, you can come here for 1 year and get a degree from Vanderbilt, and try to get some players that are overperforming their level.
Yeah. What schedule did you want, Steven? Sorry to interrupt.
The Missouri schedule.
Okay. Yep. Got it. Mizzou 2024 schedule. Murray State out of conference. Buffalo, Boston College, UMass, and then in conference, Bama, Mississippi State, Arkansas, Auburn, Oklahoma, Vandy, South Carolina, Texas A&M.
I honestly, if you told me they threw up a 9-3, I believe you.
Yeah.
I mean, it just kind of is what it is. Ole Miss's schedule, they get LSU, and they get Oklahoma, and they get Georgia. Those are the 3 major games on their schedule next year as well. Then they get Kentucky, South Carolina, Florida, Arkansas, and Mississippi State as the other 5 games.
Wake Forest is an interesting non-con game for them on the road.
Yeah, going up to Winston-Salem could be quite interesting indeed.
I think they'll be a lot better. Not that they're not going to be a playoff team, but Clawson's been pretty good up to this year. I don't expect them to stay down again.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I think if them having some sort of a rebuild, they're going to kind of run into a buzzsaw with that Ole Miss team.
By the way, Wake Forest QB Griffiths did enter the portal today.
Okay.
So,
yeah, the smart schools, everybody's kind of bailing on them, including Mike Elko.
Yeah.
So coaching wise, a lot of jobs came open. Mike also he covers the transfer portal and the coaching carousel for Mike Farrell Sports. What are some interesting rumors that you're hearing on the coaching carousel right now?
For Houston, sounds like 3 names are popping up. Jeff Traylor at UTSA would be no surprise there. He's a Texas guy. J.G. Kinney at Texas State, young up-and-comer. He flipped that roster in a year. After Colorado, they accepted more portal guys than any other school in FBS. And the Vegas favorite is Cliff Kingsbury right now for Houston. So it was an assistant there before. At Oregon State, we're hearing a lot of old names of guys who were out of football this year. Bronco Mendenhall, Brian Harsin, Nick Rolovich, and then a couple assistants, which maybe makes sense considering you're kind of in a wasteland going into next year. You have conference instability. They only have 3 games scheduled. So going to be tough for Oregon State to get a guy, I think. Duke, we're hearing like 20 different guys. I don't think they've narrowed down much. We're hearing a lot. Tommy Reese is a guy that was mentioned. Scotty Montgomery's with the Lions now, a former ECU, college guy. A lot of people in the mix for that one. So Indiana, Tom Herman has been mentioned for that one among a lot of other guys. Jim Leonard, former Wisconsin guy, also mentioned for
Jim
Indiana.
Leonard, I think, would fit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then I forget his name, but the O-line coach at Ohio State. Because Hartline is a guy I thought would be, but it's actually their O-line coach at Ohio State that's being mentioned for the job.
Okay. Hey, Dalen, we have a question here. What do you think the Ole Miss defense will be like for 2024? It's from Donnie Weiberg.
I think it'll be good. We're going to be losing 2 of my favorite players, Cedric Johnson and Jared Ivey, but I think if we can use the portal effectively and we have a lot of top freshmen coming in on that defensive line coming in next year, I think that'll help out a lot too. I think we'll be really good, man. I think Pete has already implemented something that we haven't seen here before, and that's something that's called aggression and attitude, and these players have kind of really bought into it, and I think it's kind of old school, and it's worked really well this year. But I think he's going to have to continue to work on his schemes, especially against big passing offenses. But I think we'll be really good, man. I think we're going to be refreshed, and I think something that we do have to improve on is just the depth we have, especially at positions like linebacker and defensive lineman. I think that kind of separates us from being really good to being elite. And I think we're going to continue to get more depth. So I think we'll be really good, man. It's just a time will tell kind of thing, and what kind of players kind of fit into where Pete wants them to play at.
Yeah, it should be quite interesting. Mike, when you look at the Texas A&M coaching search that led to Mike Elko and the whole Mark Stoops drama and stuff like that, it's just weird, right? The whole thing is just weird. It's like Texas A&M again.
It is weird. Though I think in the end, it worked out. Maybe they lucked into it working out, because from the beginning, I thought Elko was one of their top 3 candidates. I mean, you and I have been talking about this. You had DeBoer, Elko, Jeff Traylor seemed like the guys that the 3 of us had mentioned a couple weeks ago. You ended with one of those guys. And the interesting thing with him is it doesn't look like many of his assistants from Duke will come with, which, considering the pay raise they would have gotten, it tells me he's not asking them. So he thinks that he's going to be able to find top quality assistants He's been given a little over $11 million for his assistant coaching pool, which is significant. I mean, that's almost an unheard of number. So the interesting thing that we know that Elko said, offensive coordinator wise, he said he wants a veteran who has head coaching experience.
Yeah, he just let one of those go to Arkansas.
Yeah. And DJ Durkin, we haven't heard much. I actually think he's a really good D coordinator. They were the number one pass D in the country last year. This year they were up and down more. But
I think he's going to state.
I have heard that. That was one of the rumors. Yes. So we'll see what Elijah Robinson may be the only guy retained. Some of their fans are saying, well, he'll be the D coordinator. I think that's bogus. I think he stays as the D-line coach if he's retained. Damian Craig had Florida State, Auburn, passed, had been there for several years. He will not be retained. We found that out just this afternoon. So,
yeah. And also with Damian Craig not being retained, I believe he's the wide receivers coach.
Yes, correct.
Evan Stewart's probably going to hit the portal. And Moose Muhammad's probably going to hit the portal. So those wide receivers that were so good, about to be a little bit less good.
Sounds like both of those guys are Bama possibilities too.
Yeah, shocking, right?
Don't be surprised if Levy tries to go get DJ Durkin off the market.
Yeah.
Surprised of that.
Would be a great hire.
Yeah, and also Mississippi State people's brains are going to explode the first time he throws up a 55 to 53.
Yeah.
That one should be pretty great indeed. All right, Dalen, before we get out of here, I've got to get your opinion on this. Bobby Petrino back to Arkansas.
Man, it's funny. When this was the age that I first remember Razorback football was Bobby Petrino being there, and it was some of the funnest times of my life. I'm honestly not surprised by the move, though, and I say this because Pittman showed what he wanted last year when he got Dan Enos. He was like, okay, I know someone. They've been at this program before, and I've evaluated with them before, so I'm going to try something that's been here before, and he's gone back to that. Now, I don't know how the public is taking it because, of course, we know the outfall of him at Arkansas and just the outfall of him in general at many different places and even in the league. I'm not that upset about the move. I don't know how well it will work. Again, I think Bobby is a guy that is very old school in his ways of dynamicing an offense, may not be able to compete where Arkansas wants them to be. Now, think about this because, yes, they may improve from where they are, but will it be enough to keep Pittman's job? And I think that's the big thing is Arkansas fans are really fed up. They went 4-7 this year. 4-8, excuse me. So really, what is the improvement going to be? And also, don't be too shocked if this is just a coaching carousel. If Pittman doesn't do too well, maybe Bobby Petrino may become the head coach again at the University of Arkansas. So I wouldn't be that too surprised by that either. So it's a funny, turnaround, almost 10 years later. So we'll see how it works. It's a really fun time, though.
Yeah, and Bobby Petrino, for better for worse, he has this reputation of being kind of a snake.
Yeah.
And if he tried to do the Tommy Tuberville thing back there. The jet gate was Bobby Petrino. He left the Atlanta Falcons in the middle of the season to go to Arkansas. Yeah. It's not a good reputation. So if you told me that Bobby Petrino was coaching Arkansas in 2025, I absolutely believe that.
Yeah. I think it's funny too, just even you saying that and describing Petrino, how him and Sam will mesh together, honestly, because I think Sam is one of those more, I don't know, like kind of upstanding more people, and Bobby has kind of like an edge to him, and he really doesn't care what the public or how people think of him. So it'll be a different alpha versus alpha, mix between the two of them as well.
Yeah, it should be pretty interesting. All right, we're going to stop it here. We've been going for about 45 minutes. Thank you to Mike Huseman and Dalen Flowers for joining us tonight. Ole Miss getting ready to tip off in about an hour with NC State in basketball. We will talk about that later on this week with Tim Thomas and see what's going on there. But for tonight, this is going to be the live stream as well. But for Dalen Flowers and Mike Huseman, I'm Stephen Willis. I hope everybody has a good evening. Hotty toddy.